Early at the turn of the millennium, authorities mandated that taxis required to have predominantly white livery. But then this mandate was soon largely forgotten and taxis came in all hues as long as they sport the required identification marks and numbers. Today, there is move for taxis to again have a uniform color, including possibly livery or design for units in Metro Manila and another for those outside the metro.
In many cities and various countries across the globe, taxis can easily be recognized by their color or livery. Yellow is preferred in many cities, hence the songs about yellow taxicabs. Some cities, like Washington, D.C., it's red with a swoosh of gray. In London, the black cab dominates. This perhaps made it easier for passengers to hail cabs allowed to pick up fare on streets, as opposed to those being pre-booked or taken at designated taxi lines or terminals.
I don't see any advantage for the riding public to have the same color scheme for all the taxi unit. It's different abroad. When you go to New York, they're all yellow taxi cabs because most taxis there are operated by big companies. There's no single unit operators there. When you go to London, same thing.
In Metro Manila, except for a few years starting in 2001, taxis now come in all shapes, colors, and sizes, all only identified by yellow plates and their identifying numbers and alphanumerics painted clearly on designated side panels. Although today, airport taxis are mandated to sport at least a shade of yellow. Transport authorities, the Land Transportation Office, and the Land Transport Franchising and Regulatory Board enforced the white taxi cab rule, not only for aesthetic reasons but also for easy identification and regulation and for the convenience of passengers.
A different color scheme or livery design is allowed to fleet operators with a fleet of 50 units and above. That's to distinguish their vehicles. Now, if you notice, it would be passengers would more easily remember the cab that they load in if it had a different color scheme. Like for example, if you see a white cab with a red hood, that's basic. That's a basic taxi. If you see a red car with a black top, that's a dollar taxi. If you see a white car with a green stripe, that's an MGE. That's easier to remember, and it distinguishes the fleet operated vehicles from the single unit operated vehicles.
There was talk that a common color or livery design could make them more easily identifiable on the streets, helping identify the legitimate taxis from the colorum operators and drivers, and make commuters more confident about their safety on taxi rides. Separate color and livery for taxis operating in Metro Manila and those outside the metropolis and other cities could enhance perceived benefits for convenience and safety, and facilitate their regulation by traffic and law enforcement authorities. The question is, can this be easily enforced or imposed? Proponents are hoping that ordinances and memorandum circulars mandating uniform colors and livery for taxis could be drafted, circulated, and implemented as soon as possible. This could only happen if the LTO, the LTFRB, and higher transport authorities buy into these benefits. The bigger question is whether this would be accepted by operators. Back at the turn of the millennium, operators had agreed to and complied with LTFRB regulations mandating taxis to be predominantly white in color.
If they want a clean-looking taxi, the first thing that they should do is to allow unnecessary markings to be removed. Then you have clean vehicles. Like, for example, if you go to New York, the only marking that you will see is in a small name of the taxi, pero same color scheme. If you go to London, walang ang marking yung taxi, pero dito sobrang daming gusto nilang ilagay doon sa taxi. So hindi magandang reason yung sasabihin nila para we'll have a clean, uniform looking taxi kung yun yung dahilan.
But only a few years later, the uniform color policy seemed to have been forgotten. Perhaps its implementation didn't provide any benefit to taxi drivers and operators. Perhaps it didn't affect their business at all one way or another. Of course, taxi operators faced with increasing costs of operations and stiffer competition, especially with the advent of so-called app-based transport services and ride-sharing platform like Uber and its ilk, would find the cost of converting their units to the mandated color or livery design prohibitive.
Well, you mentioned cost. There are fleet operators that have more than 1,000 units, 500 units, and to have everything painted white again, easily that would cost you 10,000 per unit, not at least 10,000 per unit. And that does not include the downtime of the unit while having it repainted. And then secondly, for the same reason I mentioned earlier, that fleet operators want to distinguish the type of service that we got, that we give, the type of vehicles. It makes our vehicles easily identifiable to the riding public, so that there won't be any confusion when they hail a taxi. They know that they're being serviced by a particular taxi company.
The cost could also be just one of many other reasons for opposing the move. Resistance to change has been the hallmark of many transport groups, including taxi operators associations.
Our industry, the taxi industry, is over-regulated. There's so many regulations being imposed on us. You could just imagine, taxis have been existing for more than 6 decades. So memorandum, circulars, regulations, rules have been have been imposed on us, one on top of the other. So there's so much regulations now currently being imposed, and now there's a new player in town, and practically no regulation is being imposed. That's actually unfair. In fact, what the taxi operators have been saying, we don't mind competition, but it has to be a fair competition. So kung mag-i-impose na naman ng similar color scheme for taxi lang, bakit taxi lang? It should be the same for everyone.
Argument for and against, of course, should all come out if the movement gains enough headway for the LTFRB to begin rounds of consultations with both taxi operators and proponents of uniform color and livery design for taxis, part of the process for any change in regulations. Which in the end is a good thing. A healthy debate on the pros and cons of uniform color or livery design for taxi should be welcome. Perhaps it could also start with the question, what color?
Many believe that there are many benefits to having uniform taxi color or livery. For easier identification or regulation, maybe for tourism purposes. Perhaps the most compelling reason may be for the safety and convenience of passengers. Authorities should give this serious thought.